Okay, just a little bit of warning before we start. I'm not some sort of prodigy, I'm not some master or anything. I'm just a mere 1500 player, so don't take whatever I say in here for granted. Basically, I'm just making this video because I've been reading books recently, books about chess, and well, you can forget certain things there, and in order to remember them, you would have to reread the book again, except that's inefficient compared to, say, having a video made and that video explaining like the key points of the book. So that's exactly why I'm doing this. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the modern slash Pirc defense. So it's an opening, and the book is written by Joe Gallagher. So if you find any inaccuracies or mistakes in whatever I'm saying, you can direct all your hate towards him, not me. And the book's title is called Starting Out Double Dot, the Pirc slash Modern. So the Pirc slash Modern opening, both of these openings are highly similar to one another, as you will see later on, and they're both hyper-modern openings. As they call it, hyper-modern openings are basically openings that disobey basic principles, and it basically gives white the apparent advantage. But there's some heavy theory behind black's move, which gives black some sort of advantage that is not directly apparent. So let's just begin. The Pirc and the Modern are e4 openings, so it starts with e4, then the Pirc is basically followed up with d6. So d6, and as you can see, black is not playing actively, it's giving white the center stage here. So white has control over the center while black is acting very passively over here. So this is followed with a knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4, and then knight to c3 to defend the e4 pawn. After this, black plays g6 with the idea to fianchetto the bishop. This is the start of the Pirc defense. The Modern is very similar. It's just a different move order, as you will see. So again, it starts with e4, but now you want to fianchetto your bishop first instead of developing your knight. So g6, d4, bishop fianchetto, and knight to c3, and then d6. And this is the Modern defense, as you can see over here. So the only difference is the bishop is out here first instead of the knight in the Pirc. So what is the significance of the move order? Why does it lead to differences? Why even separate them in the first place? What's the deal here? Well, the Modern defense is basically a more flexible version of the Pirc defense. Because if you notice in the Pirc, well, the Pirc starts with d6, so d6, d4, g6, no, not g6, knight to f6, it attacks the pawn, and so it forces the white player to play c3 to defend the pawn. And you compare that to the Modern, where you play e4, g6, d4, g7, and you're not attacking this pawn anymore, so white is not forced to play knight to c3. Instead, white can do a bunch of other things. Most commonly, white plays c4, for example, and this leads to the King's Indian defense after d6, knight c3, knight f6, and then knight. Oh yeah, this is already the King's Indian defense. Yeah, and then knight here. This is just more of the King's Indian defense as well. So basically, white is given the freedom to decide the flow of the game. So if you want the game to be flexible with many different branches, then go for the Modern. If you want the game to be like narrow and forced, play the Pirc. So this is the main difference between the two. The modern, instead of transposing into something like the King's Indian, for example, the modern can also transpose into the Pirc. For example, after d4, g7, knight to c3, and then d6, knight to f3, and then knight to f6. This is the Pirc defense classical variation. Another way that the modern can transpose into the Pirc is if white plays f4. This is the Austrian attack. Yep, there we go. And if black follows with knight to f6 and knight f3, and then striking with c4, this goes back into the Pirc defense. So this is what we'll be talking about for the remainder of the video. The Austrian attack, which begins with f4. This is a very aggressive way for white to continue playing. As you can see, 3 pawns in the center, all occupying this huge territory over here, and black isn't black doesn't seem to be doing much. The main idea for white is to play e5 because this blocks the bishop, and the bishop has no good way of reactivating itself because it can't play this too. It's blocked as well. So overall, it's just going to be very bad for black if white is allowed to play e5. But first, white has to support this pawn push with a move like f3. So knight f6, then f3 is very common, as you can see from the right side over here. And then after this, black has to play c5 because it attacks one of the defenders of the e5 square, which white is targeting with these 3 pieces over here. So if you get rid of one of them, it softens the load for black. So c5 is played, and that goes into the Pirc defense. Alright, so over here, white basically has 2 options. These two. We're going to talk about pawn takes first. If pawn takes, then the point is not to recapture with the other pawn because that would lead to a queen trade, which is bad for black. So black will play queen a5, and the purpose of this move is to pin the knight over here. And why is that important? Well, now this allows knight takes on e4, and this is good because, well, white can't recapture with the knight as well. So this is a hanging pawn. And if white fails to recognize this threat, say white is greedy and keeps taking pawns, then simply knight takes on e4, and you have a triple attack on the knight. And white is just lost here. Even if white tries to defend with, say, c2, bishop c2, then just takes, and black is clearly better in this case. So white has to defend this pawn. So he can do that with bishop d3, defending the pawn. But then essentially white would have to abandon this pawn over here, so just queen takes. And this should be a very just drawish position, as the engine confirms. Yeah, very highly drawn. And also lots of games have been played, as you can see over here. So the position has been reached a lot of times by master players. Alright, so what's the other option here? The other option, the more popular one, is bishop checks. Over here, black has a lot of options. The good ones here is to block with knight c6 or bishop d7, and we'll go over them later. I want to show why the alternatives are worse. For example, if knight goes to d7 instead, then this is bad because white has e5, and knight basically has to go away. Even if captures, then just captures again, and knight still has to go away. So it's just the same thing. So if knight goes away, then pawn can keep pushing forward. If pawn keeps pushing forward, then black is forced to take the pawn because otherwise he would be losing the knight over here. Knight can't escape, it's pinned. So take with the pawn, and then this is bad because white has knight to g5, and knight to g5 attacks this pawn over here, which can't be guarded by black. Black can't move his knight to activate his bishop to defend this piece because black's knight is pinned, and yeah, it's just impossible to defend this pawn. And why is it important that we defend this pawn? Because if not, knight takes pawn and then you're forking the queen and the bishop, you have to lose either one of them. Even castles won't save you because castles then forks the queen and the rook. So this is a bad thing for black to play. And then knight to d7 is also bad because now you're no longer attacking e4 pawn over here. And basically this means that queen a5 is now useless. Basically it loses its potential because now pinning the knight is not going to do anything because you're not attacking, you're not pressuring this pawn over here. So it loses its effect. Queen a5 loses its effect when you retreat the knight this way. So it's just not preferable for black. And this gives us two options remaining. We have bishop blocks or knight blocks. We're going to review knight blocks first. If knight blocks, then d5 is very tempting because white might think that he's winning a piece, but actually black has a6, and if takes, you give black the open file, and if takes, you give black a very good bishop. So this is just good for black, and yeah, this is very good for black. So this could potentially be a trap. You can lure white players into playing d5 and have them be completely destroyed by this move. Another option is bishop takes knight. If bishop takes knight, then pawn takes, then say white takes the pawn again, then you have the same idea, queen a5, and then you attack the e4 pawn because knight is pinned. And now that you don't have the white bishop, you can't protect this pawn as effectively. Queen can protect the pawn. In fact, the queen can protect both of these pawns at the same time. But placing the queen here is not preferable because the queen is x-rayed by the bishop over here, and it allows for a possible discovery if knight moves. So most commonly just queen to d3 and then just takes. And this should be a drawn position as well. Slightly better for black. Draw-ish, yeah. So let's review some other options here. Takes with the pawn is possible. And again, don't take back with the pawn. Play queen a5. And again, same idea. You attack the knight, it's pinned. And so this allows knight captures. So the correct thing for white to do here is to castle. If he doesn't, then you can just take the pawn over here. Castles removes the pin, so now takes is not possible because knight can just take back again. And after white castles, black also castles. That's the main line. And over here, there are two possibilities. White can either play queen to e1, just protects the knight or something, and either that or pawn takes. If pawn takes, then you can play queen to b5 with check. And over here, king to h1 needs to be played. And after king to h1, knight can actually take here, because after takes, black can take black's queen can take the bishop. And this is not winning for white. White doesn't trap black's bishop here. Black can actually take, because if queen takes back, then queen takes rook and it's checkmate. So this position over here, it's drawn-ish as well. Yeah, draw-ish. Alright, let's see what happens if queen to e1. If queen to e1, then the move here is knight d7 attacking c5. So white can respond with takes, and if takes, then queen takes, and this gives a check. White can protect with bishop e3, and several games after this were played, and in those games black played queen takes on c6, but I prefer taking with the bishop over here and initiating a queen trade, because if takes, then white can either retreat or white can take your bishop. If white takes your bishop, then you just take his bishop. If white retreats, white can actually win a pawn here with takes on a7. If white does this, then retreat your bishop away because your bishop is a strong piece over here. You retreat your bishop, his bishop retreats, and then play something like bishop c6 to attack this pawn. And well, black has several advantages: to open a file, to open c file. These two bishops are very good, but in exchange for that, black is down the pawn, so this should be drawn as well. Yes, it is drawn. And in this position, if white doesn't take with the bishop, he's in trouble, because let's say white just does pawn captures, then bishop takes. Then if you did like that, then just take the bishop over here, and you're up a piece, 3 pieces, 2 pieces. So white is essentially forced to do this, and then you can move into the endgame earlier that I talked about after queen takes with check. And the other good move is bishop d7, over 1,000 games played. And you have a lot of options from here, but I'm gonna stop the video now because it's going on for quite a while already.